Well, hello, grievers. Mandy here. Restorative Grief is all about creating easy access to healing, no matter where or who you are. That's why I want you to remember that if you want grief support beyond a podcast, our Patreon features monthly workbooks to accompany each episode, as well as a Discord channel for more private chats and occasional bonus content as well. Supporting this work with your finances means investing in your own wellness and the healing of others, and that in itself is an incredibly generous and restorative practice. The link to the Patreon is in the show notes, but reach out with questions, okay? Now, let's get on to this week's episode. Welcome back to Restorative Grief with Mandy Capehart. You are listening to episode 129, titled As Long as You Need with J.S. Park. My guest this week is published author and hospital chaplain Joon Park. His book, titled As Long as You Need, Permission to Grieve, is a beautiful invitation into the time and space we need to mourn in our own timelines. And for those of you keeping track, this is my third recorded conversation with Joon about grief for a podcast. Why? Because his experience, expertise, and beautiful spirit have so much more to share with us. So let's get into it, shall we? And today, we have the great privilege of spending the next hour with one of our favorite guests. Joon Park is a hospital chaplain and author. He is our third-time return guest. He's our top SNL host, if you will, because he's here to share about his latest book, As Long as You Need Permission to Grieve. Joon, it's always such a fun time sharing space with you. So I'm so grateful that you're back here. And let's talk about your new book.
Returning guest, more cowbell. It's like I
That's
never
right.
left. Glad to be back.
Don't ever want you to leave. You're officially now the unofficial guest host. So I'll just randomly throw little edits from this episode into future episodes, I think.
I'm happy to keep the door revolving, returning anytime. I'm so glad to see you again.
Yeah, you too. You've had a lot going on. You've got a book baby coming into the world, but you also just brought a new baby into the world.
Yeah,
That's really
book baby
exciting.
and a baby. Yes.
Mm-hmm.
So as you can imagine, I'm in the infant marathon where it's kind of like you're running the whole time, but then randomly have to sprint.
Yeah.
And then, and so the actual running part is the rest.
This is where I breathe.
Yeah. But it's been wonderful. And the last time I had the book back in 2020 when, the world turned inside out, I also had a book release and a baby that year. And so, this is part two. And it's like, now I got a little bit of wisdom, got a little ring experience, also a little bit of age, but all of that is converging into I'm lucky. I'm all the words, blessed, all of it.
Yeah.
I'm glad to be here with you.
Absolutely. That's the thing that's impressive about your passion about this work, because we know very well that grief work is exhausting. Being a chaplain in a hospital in one of the biggest trauma centers in your area, or the biggest trauma center in your area, is already an exhausting and difficult and rewarding, but still very challenging field to be in. To then layer on, let me write about it in a vulnerable way and invite other people into this work. Why?
Yeah. I didn't think that writing about it online would catch on in any way. I think going back to that first book, that publisher at the time took a risk on me, kind of hoping that the book would take off when my platform was very small, and they really believed in it. And I think what it's told me since then, since more and more people are coming to read about the work I do, and the work that chaplains and death doulas do, and hospice, and what is palliative care, what is end of life care. All of those things are becoming more part of the conversation because I think people really do want to talk about grief, death, and dying.
Yeah.
It seems like one of those taboo topics that we shouldn't talk about it, or we're speaking negativity into the air, or somehow it's going to manifest something bad. But I think what I'm seeing is in real time online evidence that people want to have these discussions, that mortality is unavoidable and inevitable. And because of that, how do we face it and bring dignity to self, bring dignity to family as age creeps in, as mortality enters the room? And there is a way to do it. There is a way to bring dignity and safety and compassion into the room. But I think that all starts with, let's open the door, get to the table, and bring permission to talk about that.
Yeah, that's really crucial. I started the world of grief around my work as well for the same reason. I don't know if you know this, but when I first decided I'm going to start talking about grief and loss online, I started with a series called Permission to Grieve. I know why I did it. Why do you think grievers need a sense of permission in their process?
Yeah, there are a lot of historical and social reasons for that. I think the short answer is that when we talk about something that brings us pain or discomfort, there's a natural reaction to draw away from it. It's the whole, you learn in biology 101 about pain is an indicator that this stimuli must be avoided. So you put your hand on a hot stove, your body says this is hot, so you draw away. And there's something wired maybe about us, and maybe wired in a way that was socially indoctrinated and given to us, in which if something hurts, it equals bad and therefore must draw back. Rather than asking the question, what is this pain telling us? What does it mean? What is the story behind this? Is there something that can be learned from this? If not learned, is there something that we can have our attention drawn to rather than drawn away from? So, if you look historically too, and this is just a quick anthropology lesson, I think when you see the oppressive nations throughout history as they obliterated and subjugated smaller nations and annexed them. And I'm talking about Eurocentric nations being the oppressor historically, taking over quote unquote smaller nations. They would not only disallow grief in themselves, because in order to subjugate a nation, you really have to compartmentalize yourself to commit that sort of violence. But they would also not allow subjugated nations to grieve their own dead. In order to subjugate a nation, what would you do? You desecrate graves, make sure no memorials come up, because you would worry that the subjugated nation's grief, out of that could emerge retaliation and ask for reparation and rising up against the oppressive nation. Now, all of that has been anthropologically and historically built into us. We're now both oppressor and the oppressed. We've been trained out of grief. We've been trained out of being able to pause to mourn over our dead. And that has almost folded itself into hustle, grind, and institution and capitalism. I got to achieve more. The
Yeah.
ways of conquering may not be done by swallowing up nations, but the ways of conquering are certainly done still through capitalism. So grief in that sense is rushed and hurried. And there is something so unsettling in ourselves because we've been indoctrinated to think this, that when we see grief, when we see those loved ones passing before us, I mean, for one, it's uncomfortable. But for two, I think we've been convinced and persuaded that it's something we shouldn't ever talk about because it will stop us from achieving and accomplishing all that we want to. And so the means of what we think is self-actualization, a lot of that self-denial has been sort of forced into us by way of oppressive ideologies. And so that's a whole big, huge history lesson. But when I look at it, it all fits together. And I think there's a lot of unlearning that we need to do in terms of how do we confront grief in a healthy way and also confront those systems and those histories which really took grief right out of us and disallowed us from grieving.
I hope people who listen to this episode will rewind and listen to what you just said multiple times because that is a very succinct way of embodying that sense of wrongness that we feel when we kind of shut ourselves down emotionally. Because I think within every griever, there is a sensation of, well, this is a normal human experience. Of course, this hurts. Of course, it makes sense that I'm in pain and I need clarity or time or compassion, whatever it is that in that moment we're really sensing a draw toward. But when you were talking, all I thought of was that wartime phrase, keep calm and carry on, because we want the system to continue without disruption, even though we're in absolutely a critical season of grief and panic. And that permission to stay present in those moments and to really honor the individual as it fuels the collective and heals the collective, instead of the opposite, right? Oppress
Mm.
the individual because the collective wants something that is only beneficial to the machine or the system.
Yeah. And, I should add to that too. I think permission is a pretty strong word because there's something about that saying, like, I give you permission,
Right.
when permission was always granted.
Right.
And, the body remembers and the body can't lie. So you see throughout history too, every culture except maybe the Eurocentric Western culture has an appropriate way of death engagement
Yeah.
and has always risen up and spoken out, whether that was when we were oppressed. We see in Black cultures, indigenous cultures, Asian cultures, a lot of speaking up and rising up. It's almost like we couldn't help it
Yeah.
as we were being oppressed. The rituals that we had, the songs that we had, the art and dance, the culture that we preserved, all of that almost as a defiant grief response.
Yeah.
Like it's like
Absolutely.
we weren't given permission, but we didn't need permission and we kept it even outside of the view of the oppressor.
Yeah.
And so you'll see people now who um even though they've been taught don't grieve, be strong, you'll be all right,
Mhm.
and whether that's church culture or pop culture, suppressing and denying grief, there's still something in the body because it cannot lie, because the body remembers that even without permission, grief will erupt and manifest itself in ways from our body, even without us, even when we actively try to suppress it and deny it. And so I think saying the word permission, it's almost like we do need someone to validate and to say almost and to name it and be like, this is grief, or that makes me sad to hear that, or
Yeah.
that hurts me to see you hurt. But there's also something in our bodies where it's almost like we don't need permission because we know what it is.
Right.
We know what it is without even having to name it and to validate it, and it's there.
Mm. You said it earlier. How do we address grief and preserve human dignity? How do we approach death and keep our humanity and our dignity intact? That there is a way to do it. I think that this is a really big part of that, is exactly what you said, validating, hey, as a human, you have intrinsic permission to do the human things, to have the full human experience. And on your behalf, I will bear witness, right? I will show up and you don't need my permission, but I will like be the proverbial whatever in your life that allows you to say, okay, I agree with that. My inner parts resonate with that agreement. Yes, I have permission to grieve exactly as I need to. But this is where the other part of your title, as long as you need, comes in, because it's so provocative as a title in the age of keep calm and carry on, which is still pervasive. And in this sense of urgency that we experience in our daily lives, how do you help people expand their sense of time, and maybe just talk about how you approach it in the book? What does as long as you need actually look like practically for people?
Yeah, I've used this phrase so much now, hundreds of times probably, where I've used it in a technical sense and also a spiritual sense. But the technical sense is that when a patient dies, families will often ask, how long do I have to be in this room? And there are maybe clinical or medical reasons that this room may need to be moved pretty quickly, turned over pretty quickly.
Mm.
Um, Capacity issues. Um, Maybe there's a patient who needs this room. And then there's sort of a myth about rigor mortis that it sets in pretty quickly. But really, the medical team and the hospital where I work, we give a lot of time for a room, almost to the point where it feels like they can be there all day. And I've been told from up top and from nurses and physicians, there's really no time limit and they can stay in there. And so I'll tell every family when they ask me, how long can I be here? I'll always say, as long as you need. Nobody will rush you out of this room. This room is yours. You can stay here. If you have family coming, if you have family flying in, you can be here all day. Now, is there a point where a nurse may poke their head in and say, hey, do you need anything? We may have to start moving to the next step of things eventually. But
Sure.
there's not some 90-minute or 2 hour anything like that. Are there emergency situations where we need patients come in? maybe, but I would say generally most of the time, there is this sense where clinically, medically, physically, spiritually, emotionally, you take as much time as you need for this. And what I found too, in the sense, emotionally, personally, that also works for how long does grief take? Do we have this timeline around grief? And there are manuals and metrics and certain fields of science that will say, hey, here are the specific times and here are the sequences and phases and stages. And I know why we have those things. I have some sympathy for those things because it helps to have a foothold, it helps a little bit
Sure.
to have an anchor. For some people, it may work. And also, if you need certain kinds of intervention, it helps to say, okay, I've hit this phase. Maybe this means I need to seek something else or something more. But at the same time, that can accidentally become translated into if you're not better yet by this time, then something is wrong with you and you're doing this wrong. And that's when it becomes a moral value judgment. And that's when it can really hurt and harm a person. So, really, the title of the book is a phrase that I say all the time, not just in a technical sense, but spiritually and emotionally. Really, grief is going to be this lifelong process. This person you've spent your life with, that you've done life with, it's not just something that you can ever get over. That void will be there forever and eternally. And so I'm, there's always this sense that a lot of people feel like I have recovered from grief once I no longer feel this, and this. And I'm like, is that really the goal? Is it really a goal to put a timeline around that or to say that there's a cure, a resolution at the end of this grief process? And I think the process is going to be ongoing.
Yeah. It's a holistic approach to grief in a way that invites that heart, mind, body, spirit parts of who we are to the table to say, hey, consider all aspects of your need. Consider that you will need water and food at some point. So maybe the nurse is going to pop in and say, do you need anything? But holistically, you have a lot to wrestle with now in this immediate aftermath of loss. And down the line, that reorganizing of your sense of self and relationship because of this loss is something that takes as long as it takes. And I think that that's where we get so caught up because we maybe lose sight of the intensity and the types of loss that we encounter with every single new loss event. And I know that in your book, you have um, different types of loss, right? Physical, spiritual, mental, and relational losses. And I think I love that because a death is not just the death of a person in their physical body. It removes so many other parts of our understanding from our immediate experience.
Yeah. Yeah. And, in the book, I cover different kinds of losses as well. So, death of a loved one, I would say, is perhaps the biggest loss, but there are also other kinds of losses around it. And then, as you were alluding to, I think the death of a loved one, there's a cascade effect that happens.
Yeah.
A secondary grief, because there's, by now I've doing the research on grief. There's so many different names and different kinds. But as far as I can tell, or from the research I've seen, secondary grief is the grief that comes up when a loved one dies, and suddenly you find yourself with all these other quote unquote smaller losses. You know,
Yeah.
like even loss of income, loss of physical comfort and presence,
Right.
loss of inside jokes and future promises and shared plans. And then, every memory of them that you had is now going to be punctured by sorrow as well. There's all these kinds of little losses. But yeah, that whole body, the holistic, I wrote in the book, we grieve differently as much as we need differently.
Mm.
And so there are all different kinds of losses. There's different things that happen with each loss, and there are also different things we need for each loss as well. You know, um, I think people enter different, this is such a Christian spiritualized word, but we do enter different seasons, where
Mhm.
we need different things too, depending on who we are and where we are. Like somebody who may have loved music and finds comfort in music or nature, when they're grieving, they may hate it all of a sudden and just not want any of that and just say, no, I need something totally different. Or I'll see, especially younger people in the room, they may have like a numb look, no tears, almost like a cognitive fog or fatigue as they see their loved ones approach to the end. And I'll notice, especially like this makes me sound maybe too old, but I'll see like Gen Z, younger folks basically. And they, yeah, they look like they're just on their phone, and somebody may judge them like, hey, go spend time with your, et cetera, et cetera. Be present and stuff. And I tend to think, well, it's possible that they are coping with this by entering into the safety of their digital dreamscape. And this is what they need right now. Is it always healthy to be doing that? I'm not sure. I can't say. But is that a response? Is that a grief response? Yes, it is. And is that something that we can validate? And if somebody laughs during grief, is that wrong? Sometimes we do laugh, remembering something, or sometimes it's just what erupts from the body. But whether it's an extreme reaction like screaming, shouting, dancing, laughing, rolling on the floor,
Yeah.
or something where it looks like shutdown, extreme fatigue, um, sitting in a corner. Sometimes, even for some folks, they've told me in a guilty way, like, you know what, as I'm watching my loved one die, there's just these long stretches of time. It's almost boring. Like, people don't talk about yeah, that kind of long, lingering, looking at the heart rate and monitor and just waiting and waiting and waiting. And then maybe I'll leave and go home and shower and then come back. It's almost like this interminable stretch of time.
Yeah.
But I'm trying to validate all of it and see it, as you said, as a whole body response to it.
Yeah. That's a very intense experience of anticipatory grief too, when you're in those last moments and you're in those last moments, that invasion of anxiety and waiting and wondering and do I have time to go home? And but what if they go while I'm gone? All of that compressed experience of anticipatory grief right in that moment. These are all pieces that you get the opportunity, and hopefully others can hear and recognize, oh, these are opportunities for me too, to really honor and acknowledge that full grief experience, that it is so nuanced and it is so convoluted in a lot of ways that, like you said earlier, when we start to put a moral judgment on it, or pathologize it, we miss out on what's actually authentically happening. And getting bored with the process is completely expected. I'll leave it at that because I want to validate that too. That experience is so human. It's so real. And I think there's a lot of fear associated with I'll say confessing, just to stay in that, whatever. That's
Yeah,
the language that we have. But
yeah,
to stay in that place where we admit, oh gosh, I was super bored watching grandma die in the hospital. It sounds so callous, but the reality is your best method of coping and managing through a crisis is going to be what's always worked for you. And if escapism has been a tool that has worked, that is a morally neutral thing. It's not good or bad. It's just what works right now. And eventually it might stop working and new things will need to come to the surface and new strategies get explored. But in that moment, I don't understand how anyone can see themselves or see another person in a moment of crisis like that and truly feel that judgment is the appropriate way to
hmm
approach themselves or others.
yeah. And there are things that work that we know in the moment, this is what works for me. And then there are things that just emerge that
Yeah.
we almost feel embarrassed about or guilty by, the types of sounds that we can make.
Hmm.
Or I'll give one example, and I've seen this happen more than once, where when there is a patient who, if they've been removed from their ventilator, they may spend hours in agonal breathing, basically taking their last breaths. Sometimes they may die in 5 minutes. Sometimes it can take 5 hours or longer. But I remember there were a few patient visits where there was family surrounding the patient, their agonal breathing. And sometimes they'll take a breath, let it out, and then like 10, 20, 30 seconds can pass before the next breath. And so it may seem like this patient has died, but then they'll take that next breath. And I remember being with several families where they thought it was the last breath. And can you imagine over and over just thinking, this is the last breath? And I was with one family where I did this prayer, and the prayer, patient hadn't breathed for a long time. And the family thought, wow, our loved one died during this chaplain's prayer. And then about 10 seconds after, they were like, I think she's gone. She took another breath, and the whole room went, ah, like that. And I think they felt so guilty doing that because they looked at me and they were like, Chaplain, we did. And I was like,
Oh,
that's okay. You know, they had this frustration slash irritability slash almost like, we just want our loved one to finally be at peace, you know?
right.
And that's those things that emerge like that. There can be an embarrassment or guilt or shame, almost like I shouldn't feel this way, or am I
Yeah.
supposed to? And I try to make as much room for that as I can, because, you know, in grief, we're not always at our best, believe it or not.
Turns out
Right. You
the
know, we're
low
not always,
moments.
yeah, we're not always self-monitoring and our filters are not up and all
Yeah.
the socially trained things that we've done to be on our best behavior. It's just,
Yeah.
it's, it's raw, unfiltered, visceral humanity. And I look at the human response, you know, I look at oh, that person in their entirety without judgment, as this is them without any kind of, they just tired, they can't prop themselves up anymore, modifying their behavior to look their HR best, you know. And so it's whatever emerges. I don't make any kind of judgment out of it, and I just try to validate, hey, that's okay, you know, it's what your body needed in the moment. And then they realize, okay, you know, that this is okay. And then maybe this is what works for me. And maybe this response in this moment is exactly what I needed.
I love that because I can picture that scenario where everyone in the room is like, oh my God, just die already, in the most loving, compassionate, I want you to be at peace, but I also would like to be at peace. This tension on my nervous system is a lot, right? And I don't know if I've ever told you this. I know I haven't, I might have shared it on the show at one point. I was 30 minutes too late to my mom's death. I was on the way and yeah, I spent
Mm.
extra time before I took the flight to make sure my family had what they needed. And as I was driving from the airport, I pulled into the parking lot and saw everyone milling about. And my mom had been on hospice for probably a month and a half, maybe a little bit longer. And I had been there and I had seen her in a different facility. But I, of course, didn't know that was my last time with her. And it was awful seeing her. She was in pain and it was awful. And so when I arrived and my cousins and my sister walked up to my car, I'm like, what are you guys doing out here? It literally didn't occur to me. Oh, mom is gone. And finally they said, shoot, you're about 30 minutes too late. And it took me a moment. I went in and I saw her and I felt very conflicted, not
Yeah.
because, oh, I didn't get to say goodbye to my mom. I remember thinking, wow, you all had to witness her die.
Yeah.
It was such an interesting, and I can say interesting now, of course, at that time I was me, so I was very shut down and practical, like, okay, well, everyone's hungry, right? I'll get pizza. My brain goes into planner and take care of people mode. But
Yeah.
in the years that have passed, I remember thinking that moment itself was just one part of every single one of our stories in the grief that we've experienced individually and collectively as a family since losing her. And to know very clearly that this far down the road from that loss, everyone in the family is dealing with things from that moment still in different ways, even myself. That really does. I mean, it's been 2016, so 8 years now.
Yeah.
That's not even close to as long as I need to process. Am I okay that I missed her last moments? Am I okay that everyone was there but me? Those kind of things, you know? And I think that that's where this work that you've produced, I'm so grateful for it because learning to give ourselves the space and build our capacity to occupy that space is really, really important. And I know the way that you present grief work and invite people into that process is really gentle. And I think that that's exactly it. Our culture wants us to not only rush through things, but force ourselves into shapes and contort to make sense to other people. And the opposite is what is actually healing and restorative, is that gentle approach, building of capacity and willingness to explore what's in our darkest corners now that we have capacity to go toward ourselves
Yeah.
in a different way.
Mandy, can I ask, thanks for sharing that with me too. Like 8 years later, are you doing with that today?
Yeah, it's a good question. January we're recording this now in March, and January is typically the worst month every year. That was the month that she died. I had a miscarriage in 2020 in January. I was going through a massive job change right before COVID started, and I had a former boss who was being pretty horrific as an individual, among other things. And then COVID hit. And so I tend to insulate myself really well leading up to January. And historically, I've had just awful anxiety and just depression and misery in the month of January. And this year I thought, well, and I'm also not a resolution person. So it's a very like conflicting season for me every time it rolls around. And this year it was the best January I have had in 8 years. I was prepared knowing like this is going to be tough because all of it is tough. And how do I approach myself differently? How can I be drawn, as you said, towards something instead of trying to get myself away from something? So instead of avoiding the pain, what if I am drawn into something new? And what does that look like for me? So I tried new things, and every single day was as intentional as possible in January. And it was really wonderful. Now, that's not to say that I then turned around in February and I was very sick, and all of the big emotion that, of like the catharsis that
Yeah.
didn't necessarily get out in January, started to come to the surface. And I don't think that that's a bad thing. You know, I think there's layers. Catharsis is not trauma expression, but it's like the doorway. It's opening the door to be able to get through and face our trauma and our losses. But
Yeah.
I feel very strongly that through the process of my own therapy and trauma work, and, you know, writing on a daily basis and really finding what brings my full experience of humanity in myself and reforms those structures in my own internal world that have been really, really shattered for a long time. It's helped me create space where I can look at the people around me and say, here's what I actually need from you. And
Mm,
this is what it would look like to support me. And it's not going to be as time intensive as I think it is. I know that as grievers, it's hard to ask for help because we don't want to be a burden. And then we get to the point where we're like, well, we're not a burden. We have to believe differently about ourselves. We're not a burden for having a human experience. But
yeah.
it's interesting how my own grief process has shifted really significantly, while at the same time cognitively doing the work to show up for other people. It's a completely different textbook, you know, like my own grief work and the grief work to be an educator and grief coach are different. They're different classrooms. And so
Mm,
I think I would say, yeah, I feel like right now grief is relatively easy. Now that's to say Easter's coming up, and my daughter brought up the other day, didn't we spread your mom's ashes on Easter that one year? And I'm like, yeah, babe, we sure did. I don't know why we put those two together. I guess that's what we did. I actually do know why, but she's too little to understand. So,
yeah.
but yeah, thanks for asking.
Yeah. No, I'm so glad to hear. And when I say glad, that comes with layers.
Yes.
Yeah. About how this January was better than the others. Um, yeah. I mean, grief it's layers and layers of sediment. They're always shifting, and every layer needs something different. And we water the ground differently, the best we think we know how.
Yeah.
And yeah, and it seems like some of that watering, you've seen some saplings this time around, and that's great to hear. And still, the sediment shifts, and there's still hard spots, hard days.
Yeah. You know, and I
Yeah,
think that that's what matters the most. And the most is such a loaded statement, but I do. I think that's what matters the most as we learn how to grieve, is that we learn how to recognize this is an integrative process. This is something that will not come to an end. This will continue to shift. It will
yep,
continue to be, feel heavy at times and feel lighter. And sometimes the things that make us unable to breathe deeply are the same things that make us laugh hysterically the next year. So maybe that loss of breath is because we're heaving tears or we're heaving laughter. It's both and, and I'm
yeah.
excited for people to read your book this time around, especially because I was reading this star review from Publishers Weekly, sir, which is amazing. Congratulations. I know those are hard to come by.
Thank you. I'm
Yeah.
very blown away and overwhelmed.
Yeah.
Very, very thankful for that.
Yeah.
It's not something I expected. And yeah, I thank you for bringing that up too.
Oh, absolutely. I'm going to read what they said. So this part toward the end of their review says, though there's plenty of gentle advice, construct a healthy support system, grieve in community, readers will welcome Park's willingness to raise as many questions as he answers, whether he's describing his patient's challenges or his own, including how his faith disintegrated early in on his chaplaincy, as he often felt that, quote, prayers are radio waves, but God has no antenna, no receiver, and no face, end quote. It's an excellent resource for those working their way through loss. That last sentence, Joon, it's so true. Everything you've created has been an invitation for people to approach themselves differently and to approach their grief and their loss with a lens of compassion and curiosity. And I'm just so excited that you've written yet another beautiful work to do just that, invite us into a new pathway towards ourselves.
Thank you, Mandy. This is one of those things where I have a hard time receiving. Even when I get that star review, I was like, oh my goodness, I'm just this small time guy in Florida, and what do I know? And I tend to deflect. And so I also want to tell you that your work is incredible and amazing. And also thank you for saying all the kind things and words. I Yeah, I think I was maybe not surprised, but maybe what's the word? I was sort of curious and drawn in by the quote that the person picked for their review.
Mm,
Yeah, because I know those reviews, I think they're written anonymously from their pool of critics or reviewers,
mhm.
but that they touched on the part where my faith had disintegrated, you know, and that God had to me no face at that time. And so I I think that's one of those where, yeah, it's the crux of the book. Like, let's talk about that.
Yeah. I thought it
Yeah.
was a fascinating quote as well. I just thought,
Of all
gosh,
the things, they picked
of
that one.
all the
Yeah.
things. But isn't that just it? In our grief, everything is on the table.
Yeah.
Everything is available for question and criticism. And I remember pretty it was before my mom died. Actually, it was before she was sick. My husband's best friend was diagnosed with a brain tumor and he ended up passing 8 months later. And it was horrific and horrible and the worst thing ever. To this day, it still is. But I remember very
Mm.
clearly we were involved heavily in evangelical culture and people were constantly asking, why aren't you going to the prayer rooms? Why aren't you having the healing rooms come and visit or talk over and all these things? And after he died, it was so interesting watching people defend God, defend the process. And I just thought, well, why does any of this need defending? Why are we so black and white about life and death? They're nuanced. It's all energy. What then? And of course, people didn't love those questions. So I moved away from them for a while. But that's exactly it. That willingness to say, hey, what are the questions that are in front of you? We may or may not find answers. We may or may not find satisfying answers, I should say. But asking those questions is still crucial and really important.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I have some compassion for those folks who said things like that because I know when we
Yeah.
use like institutional or theological deflection,
Yeah.
it's almost like my worldview is being shaken
Yes.
by this loss that I'm seeing and the
Yes.
degree and extremity of suffering that I'm seeing. It suddenly seems like, where is God in this?
Yeah.
And what is God doing? And is there a purpose, or is this haphazard and chaotic and random? And how can this suffering be so bad?
Yeah.
And looking into the face of whether it's evil or suffering, looking into the face of genocide or abuse, looking into the face of mass violence, looking into the face of these terrible things that we think humanity it should never touch, you
Yeah.
know. Yeah, that's when we start to prop up these theologies or institutions in order to find what isn't really safety, but is just comfort.
Yeah.
And there's a big difference between the two.
Yeah.
And sometimes my role, as tough as that is to sort of maybe enter into that and introduce, or if not introduce, at least point to a little bit. Hey, here's some of the discomfort that you're experiencing and why that it might be okay to feel that discomfort a little bit and to realize, yep, the ground has shaken and shifted. And your worldview, maybe there's gaps in there, and that's all right. And maybe we can't answer all the questions and fix all the things and resolve all the stuff with the answers. So yeah, I think it used to outrage me when I saw and heard people do that, and still does this a little bit.
Hmm.
But I'm also trying to hold a little bit of grace where I'm like, maybe you weren't taught anything else, just like I
Yeah.
wasn't.
Yep.
I think the tools and the things that I was given by the church culture when I entered didn't hold up.
Yeah.
The face of God did become a race for me, and I did come back to faith, but much, much differently.
Yeah.
And so I think asking those questions and keeping open hands, that's important.
Yeah. Well, speaking of open hands, everybody needs to keep their hands open to hold a copy of your book. It's available for pre-order right now. That was a good transition, right?
That was a fantastic A
My
plus.
God, the
I
smoothness with
I
which.
I felt that was just a great. I My goodness, I really couldn't have said it better. Uh,
Man.
yeah, that was a
Great.
big. Woo, yeah.
Thank you.
You
Okay,
hit.
so it's let's see, your book comes out April 16th, so a couple of weeks
Mhm.
from now, and you can pre-order it as long as you need Permission to Grieve by J.S. Park everywhere. Everyone needs to go get the audiobook too, since it's recorded by you, good sir.
Yes, I did get to record this time, and I'm so happy about that.
Magical.
And Audible reached out to do a collaboration with me, so I'm gonna be showing up on their social media as well.
Awesome, as you
Yeah,
deserve, because you have a fabulous writing voice, but your audible, your spoken word is also so captivating. So thank you again for sharing it with us, for being here and putting your heart on paper for the rest of us to benefit from. It's such a
Mandy,
gift.
thank you, and I'm happy to return and be the get the Cape Heart Medal for
That's
most
right.
return guest.
Actually, after 3 episodes, you're required to get a tattoo. It's very awkward. I'm so sorry,
Oh,
but,
well, if that's in the small print, I must honor that.
I will go so far as to get an awkward tattoo. Don't worry, it's like a shared tattoo thing. It's getting weird now. I'll stop. Rather than embodying a sense of urgency, Joon's work reminds us that our humanity is valuable in all its manifestations, and we are worthy of the time it takes to explore what heals and what brings us back into ourselves. He is such a treasured guest on this show, so if you're new to his work, go back and listen to episode 111 of Restorative Grief for more Joon wisdom. Our first chat with him was for another podcast project, so I've included a link to that episode in the show notes as well. You can pre-order his new book as long as you need Permission to Grieve through the link in the show notes and, of course, wherever else you buy your own books online. Be sure to give him a follow on social media and subscribe to the podcast for weekly episodes, and maybe consider becoming a patron for bonus material, bonus episodes, and content as well. And as always, one last thing. Please remember, the only solution to grief is to do the work of grieving. Thank you for listening. I'll see you next week.